Late afternoon heat shimmered over the back lot of Elmridge High, turning the school's sun-bleached bricks the color of rust. Flags atop the entrance snapped in the May wind while teenagers in half-zip gowns loitered by the gym doors. Into this ordinary small-town scene rolled a steel, gray Dodge Charger, its low growl cutting through the chatter. Solomon Drayton slid the car into the last spot along the chain-link fence. As the door swung open, his shadow stretched long across the asphalt, a tall, broad-shouldered black man in a dress, blue Marine Corps uniform so sharply pressed it seemed carved from midnight. Polished shoes flashed like mirrors, the rows of ribbons over his heart glinted under the sun. None of it was vanity. Solomon only knew one way to wear a uniform perfectly. He paused, letting the weight of the day settle. 8 hours on the road from Temple had stiffened his knees, but the Charger had been his wife's favorite ride, and driving it still felt like holding her hand. Reaching into the glove box, he pulled out a faded photo, her cradling newborn Taryn, eyes bright with a future she would never see. Solomon tucked the picture inside his jacket and whispered, "Told you I wouldn't miss this." The walkway to the gym felt longer than it was. Every step carried memory. Inside, the air was heavy with floor wax, cheap popcorn, and nervous electricity. Portable chairs filled the hardwood floor. Bleachers groaned under the weight of proud relatives, and a volunteer with a clipboard tried to impose order on the chaos. Solomon offered his printed ticket. The volunteer gave it barely a glance, pointed left, and said, "Third row, family section, up front." Solomon nodded, voice steady, "Thank you," and threaded through the crowd. Conversations faltered as people noticed the uniform. A few stared, a few looked away quickly, unsure what to do with their curiosity. Solomon had lived with that tension his whole life. Today it slid off him like water on wax steel. Row 3, seat 5. The plastic chair wobbled, but he settled without complaint, back straight, boots planted. Ahead, silver letters spelled CSO of 2024 across a sagging banner, and school board members shuffled note cards at the podium. At the opposite end of the gym, a restless line of rubbed seniors waited for their cue. Somewhere in that sea of caps was Tyron, 18 years old, lanky, same eyes as his mother. Solomon's chest tightened, an H and a pride so intertwined he couldn't name where one ended and the other began. Around him the room swelled, scraped chair legs, rustling programs, a dropped coffee cup, laughter that rang a little too loud. None of it reached him. His world had narrowed to the stage, the rows of young faces, and the photo warm against his chest. Then the band struck up Pomp and Circumstance. The crowd rose as one. Solomon stood too, shoulders squared, arms at his sides, a living salute. When the last chord faded, the national anthem followed. Hands flew to hearts. Solomon didn't move. His entire bearing was pledge enough. Music lingered in the rafters as people reclaimed their seats. Solomon lowered himself, spine still ramrod straight, and that's when he caught the first flicker of movement. 2 private security guards in black polos and cargo pants were making a beeline down the side aisle, eyes fixed on him. One short and thick through the chest, the other tall, gums smacking, both under 30. Solomon felt the moment tighten like a knot in a rope, yet he remained motionless, palms resting loosely on his thighs, gaze locked on the stage. Years of training had taught him that sometimes the most commanding thing a man could do was simply refuse to flinch. The ceremony continued, names announced, polite applause. But in the third row, time slowed to a breath before thunder, and as the guard stepped into Solomon's row, the story of the day took its first sharp turn, unseen by the stage lights yet felt by every soul close enough to sense the air change. The last chord of the anthem was still shimmering off the rafters when Solomon lowered himself into the flimsy plastic seat again, spine unbending. A heartbeat later, 2 security guards in black polos began threading down the side aisle with the single-minded stride of men who already knew the answer to every question they were about to ask. The shorter guard, square, shaved head, badge reading Harlan Security Services, leaned in until his shadow covered Solomon's ribbons. "Sir, you'll need to come with us." Solomon turned just enough to meet his eyes. "Is there a problem?" "Family section's full," the taller guard chimed in, cracking gum like it was punctuation. "We've got plenty of seats in the back." Without haste, Solomon produced the ticket he had shown at the door. "Third row left," confirmed. Neither guard bothered to glance at it. "It's full now," the short one repeated, as though repetition were authority. "It was full when I sat down, too," Solomon replied, voice level as a carpenter's bubble. "Who changed the order?" The taller man's jaw tightened. "Look, let's not make this a thing. You'll be more." His pause carried decades of history. Comfortable in the back. Around them, conversations faltered. Programs stopped rustling. A middle schooler angled her phone, already recording. Solomon didn't rise. He let silence do the heavy lifting. "I drove 8 hours to watch my son walk that stage," he said, each word placed with care. "I'll be watching from right here." The short guard's fingers hovered near his radio. Power, Solomon knew, loved an audience. A pale-haired woman 2 seats over whispered, "Don't you move, sweetheart." But the guards pressed closer, determined to reclaim ground no one had given them. "Last chance," the tall one said, stepping so near his belt brushed Solomon's knee. Solomon's reply was quiet steel. "You don't have that kind of chance to offer." Something in the air shifted, an almost audible click, as if the building itself had taken a breath. The short guard muttered into his mic, the tall one's confidence bled away by millimeters. They still hadn't understood that the man in front of them had survived worse than plastic chairs and borrowed authority. Then, from the far end of the gym, the double doors thudded open. 6 men entered, not in formation, not in uniform, but carrying the exact same stillness Solomon wore. They drifted to separate corners, taking seats without a word, yet anyone with instincts could see the pattern angles covered, exits monitored, calm established. The guards didn't know it yet, but they had just crossed a line drawn years earlier in Kandahar sand. A line guarded ever since by 6 Navy SEALs who never forgot the man that saved their lives. The security guards never saw the first one slip in, a broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper stubble stepped through the double doors, scanned the room like he was reading wind speed, then took an empty seat on the center aisle. No badge, no rank on his collar, just an economy of movement that said combat veteran louder than any patch could. 30 seconds later, a second stranger appeared high in the bleachers, folding himself into the crowd as though he'd always been there. Then a third, off to Solomon's right. By the time the fourth and fifth arrived, one leaning casually against the back wall, the other settling near the exit, Solomon no longer needed to count. He felt them as surely as he felt the weight of his boots. 6 points on an invisible compass, coverage complete. They didn't look at each other and gesture, didn't so much as nod. Yet everything about their placement was math. Angles, sightlines, exits, contingencies honed in places where mistakes cost limbs. The gym's fluorescent lights washed out most details, but not the telltale markers: square wrists scarred by rope, noses broken once too often, eyes that never truly relaxed. Solomon kept his gaze forward, letting a thin, knowing smile crease one corner of his mouth. Brothers are present. The guards, of course, noticed nothing until the air itself thickened. The tall one, Mally, stopped chewing his gum and glanced over his shoulder, suddenly unsure of the script. The shorter guard, Garvin, stiffened as if he'd walked into a room that smelled of smoke. A teacher at the end of Solomon's row tried to resume polite conversation, but her voice faltered mid-sentence. Parents who'd been scrawling on their phones set the screens down, sensing, though they couldn't explain why, that something irreversible was about to happen. Garvin leaned closer, forcing bravado. "Sir, last warning. Stand up or..." He never finished. Because midway through that sentence, the man in the aisle, the first arrival, rose to his full height. His coat parted just enough to reveal the ghost of a trident tattoo on his collarbone. He said nothing, he simply stared. Across the gym, 2 more of the newcomers stood in perfect echo. Folded arms, neutral expressions, eyes hard enough to pit steel. The effect rippled through the bleachers like the hush before a thunderclap. Garvin's throat bobbed. Mally took half a step back, uncertainty creeping over his features. Authority, they realized, had just migrated elsewhere. Still Solomon did not move. The only sign he was aware of the shift was the soft exhale from his nose. A warrior's laugh too private for sound. Garvin tried one last push, dropping his voice so low it grated like gravel. "You think that uniform makes you special? This ain't a base, old man." A murmured Jesus drifted from somewhere behind Solomon. The insult hung in the stale gym air, then died on contact with the row of silent men now flanking the space like sentinels. At that precise moment, the school band stumbled into an off-beat flourish, oblivious, and the principal glanced up from her program, eyes widening as she registered the tableau forming in Section 3. The first CL finally spoke. Not loud, not theatrical, just calibrated. "You're embarrassing yourself, son. Walk away." 6 words delivered with glacier calm landed heavier than any shout. Mally swallowed, tugged Garvin's sleeve, and in that pregnant pause before pride could override prudence, the shorter guard made the only choice left to him. He holstered his temper, turned on his heel, and followed Mally up the aisle, disappearing through the doors with shoulders 2 inches lower than before. A collective breath escaped the room, the kind you don't realize you've been holding until it's gone. Programs rustled. A toddler resumed kicking the back of a chair. On stage, a guidance counselor tapped the microphone and called the next graduate, voice quivering but serviceable. The 6 SEALs remained standing for another heartbeat, scanning the perimeter. Then, as if choreographed, they all sat, motion synchronized yet effortless. Order restored, threat neutralized, story moved on. Only Solomon stayed exactly as he'd been from the start, boots planted, back straight, eyes fixed on the stage where his son waited in line, completely unaware that an old debt written in Kandahar sand had just been paid again. In silence, in loyalty, in full, Memory yanked Solomon out of the overheated gym and slammed him into the dust, yellow light of Kandahar province, circa another lifetime. Late afternoon there wasn't gentle. The sun dropped like a sledgehammer, splintering shadows and boiling the air. Gunnery Sergeant Solomon Drayton had just finished a briefing when the world turned inside out. An IED, hidden under a ribbon of dirt road, detonated beneath the lead Humvee, flipping the 5-ton vehicle the way a child might kick a toy. Metal confetti rained through the orange haze. The shockwave rattled ribs before anyone could even swear. And then came the gunfire, not panicked bursts, but cold, braided volleys that said ambush rehearsed. Solomon dove behind what used to be a doorframe, mind already triaging chaos. Through swirling grit he spotted 6 men pinned behind the burning carcass of the second truck, 2 motionless, 1 crawling, 3 firing blind just to keep the shooters honest. The crawler was Petty Officer Creed Marston, bleeding from a thigh round yet dragging Seaman Enrique Soto by the straps of his vest. Instinct overruled caution. Solomon sprinted, bare ground, bullets snapping past like angry hornets, before sliding into cover beside them. "You're leaking," he growled, shoving a field dressing against Creed's leg. "Not as bad as Soto," Creed rasped back, blood on his teeth. Smoke parted long enough for Solomon to glimpse their missing teammate Divas, half crushed beneath a flaming engine block. Without thinking, Solomon told Creed, "Move on my move," then broke cover again. Heat peeled at his skin, the ground under him convulsed with impacts. He skidded to the wreck, planted 1 boot and heaved. Every tendon screamed, metal shrieked, but the hood lifted 2 agonizing inches, enough for Divas to yank a mangled leg free before they tumbled backward into the dirt. By then Lim and Horton had crawled over, rifles barking measured bursts. Creed reappeared, hobbling yet hauling Soto. Together the 6 formed a lurching convoy, dragging, until the ridge swallowed them and the gunfire tapered into uneasy silence. No victory whoops followed, only coughing, the slap of tourniquets, and Solomon's voice counting heads until he hit 6 alive. He stayed on rear watch, eyes carving the horizon, until the medevac rotors finally drowned out the ringing in his ears. After that afternoon, a promise settled in the blood of those men, unspoken but absolute. If Solomon Drayton ever needed anything, anywhere, they would arrive, quiet, out of uniform, and ready to stand. The Kandahar dust receded, fluorescent light rushed back in. Creed Marston was still on his feet in the center aisle, posture carved from granite. Eyes fixed on the 2 guards who hadn't yet realized the ground was shifting beneath them. Around him the low murmur of the gym seemed to fold inward, as if the building itself was waiting to hear what would happen next. Garvin, the stocky guard with the shaved head, cleared his throat, mistaking the hush for an opening. "Sir," he announced, louder than before, "this is your last warning. Either you move, or we move you." He edged forward until the nylon of his belt brushed Solomon's knee, a not so subtle promise of force. Solomon turned just his head, the motion slow enough to feel like a verdict. To do what, exactly? Each syllable rang with calm so complete it sounded like threat. Heat rose in Garvin's face. "Stop making a scene," he hissed. "This isn't your base." His gaze flicked to the medals on Solomon's chest, then the line he should never have crossed. "Uniform or not, you're no better than anybody else in here." The words struck the room like dropped glass. A father froze mid-photo, a little girl stopped kicking the chair in front of her. Even Mally, the gum-chewing partner, looked as if he wanted to crawl out of his own boots. Creed's reply was barely above a whisper, yet it carried to the rafters. "Touch him?" he said. "And you answer to me?" He took 1 deliberate step forward. Across the gym, 2 more of Solomon's old unit mirrored the movement, standing in perfect echo, arms folded, eyes flat as gunmetal. Then the remaining 3 rose 1 by 1 until 6 silent sentinels framed the space. Mally's bravado withered first. His shoulders sagged as he tugged at Garvin's sleeve. But Garvin's pride was a fuse too short to save face. His hand drifted toward the front of his belt, near the radio, too near the baton. Creed's voice dropped another octave. "You don't want where this is headed, son. Walk away." From the stage, a school board member made frantic eye contact with the principal. She hurried down the steps, whispering an urgent order that neither guard could ignore. Whatever she said, it pried Garvin loose. He backed up a single pace, then another, momentum suddenly too heavy to resist. Mally followed, head down, both of them exiting the aisle like men who just remembered an appointment elsewhere. Breath rushed back into the gym. Programs fluttered. Someone laughed too loudly in relief. The 6 SEALs remained standing for 1 measured heartbeat, scanning, confirming threat 0, before easing into their seats, motion synchronized like a final semaphore. And Solomon, he never unfolded his hands, never shifted his boots. He simply refocused on the stage where his son's row was inching forward, unaware that an old battlefield promise had just been honored again. In silence deep enough to drown a storm, Tyron Drayton stood mid-cue, gown clinging to his shoulders, trying to match the easy laughter of classmates who were obsessing over tassels and selfies. But his focus kept tunneling past the stage lights, past the banner that screamed CLSO of 2024, to row 3, seat 5, where his father sat as immutable as bedrock. He'd spotted the guards the instant the anthem ended, black polos cutting through the aisle, posture stiff with borrowed authority. Tyron's pulse ratcheted up, each step they took sensing with the bass drum of his heart. From where he waited, he couldn't catch the words, only the body language. Dad's perfect stillness, the guards' fidgeting frustration, the crowd's slow building hush. Then the tide turned. A tall man in a dark coat rose like a breaker, followed by another high in the bleachers, then a third, fourth, fifth, 6 in all, unfolding across the gym with the quiet coordination of a closing hand. They didn't bark, didn't gesture, they simply existed, and the room recalibrated around their gravity. Tyron felt it hit him like static. These men know my father the way storms know the sea. The assistant principal tapped his shoulder. Something about checking his name card, but the words dissolved before reaching his brain. All he could see were unspoken lines of allegiance stretching from Kandahar sand to this varnished hardwood floor. For the first time he understood that the medals on his father's chest were not souvenirs, they were covenants. The queue inched forward. Tyron wiped his palms on the satin, trying to steady his breath. One classmate whispered, "You ready?" He managed a nod that carried more truth than any speech he'd ever give. Somewhere between pride and fire, a new realization was forging itself. Manhood wasn't volume, it was composure under pressure. And in that third row seat, his father was teaching the lesson without moving a muscle. The queue crept forward, tassels swaying like pendulums, marking the seconds to a new life. Tyron was 3 souls away from the podium now, close enough to feel its spotlights warming his face, far enough that the roar of his pulse still drowned the crowd. A hush the size of a heartbeat settled as the announcer checked her next card. She cleared her throat, and something in the cadence told the room this name mattered. Tyron Drayton. The gym inhaled, then erupted. Not a ragged cheer, but a single, deep volley of applause, 6 sharp reports leading the rhythm. The seals, still posted like pillars, clapped in perfect cinch, palms striking with parade ground precision. Their unity turned ordinary applause into a drumline of respect, a coded salute only warriors fully understood. Tyron stepped onto the stage, gown swishing, cords glinting. He moved neither fast nor slow, but with the deliberate certainty of someone answering a call older than the rafters above him. He took the diploma, shook the principal's trembling hand, then pivoted toward the sea of faces. Row 3, seat 5. His father sat exactly as before, back unbowed, hands bridged in his lap, eyes fixed on his son like a north star. Solomon did not stand, did not wave. He offered one small smile, an ember, yet bright enough to light Tyron's whole horizon. Tyron answered with a nod so slight it might have been a breath, yet the moment cracked something open in every onlooker. Balloons bobbed to ceiling tiles, parents wiped at eyes they swore were only itchy, and even the band's next chord came out steadier, as though the instruments themselves had caught their balance. The applause lingered an extra measure before tapering into the ordinary rhythm of diplomas and polite claps. But the atmosphere had changed. Every graduate who followed crossed that stage inside the echo of a father's silent pride and 6 brothers, in arms, who had reminded a town, in under 10 seconds, what honor sounds like when it chooses to speak. The moment the last cap thudded back to earth, the gym exploded in a tangle of hugs, flash bulbs, and helium balloons. Solomon let the tide wash past him. Only when the aisles thinned to echoes did he rise, joints protesting hours of parade ground posture. Creed Marston drifted over, trench coat shoulders relaxed now that the storm had passed. "You good, Gunny?" he asked, voice pitch for warriors, not headlines. Solomon answered with half a nod. "Been through worse." Creed's mouth twitched, half grin, half apology. "Still shouldn't have happened." Javier Meeks materialized beside them, as if he'd grown out of the scuffed floorboards. "Jarvin so much as twitches again, we'll handle the paperwork." Solomon raised a palm. "It's handled. I need eyes on my boy." Out on the asphalt, the Texas sun had mellowed to copper, stretching every shadow across the parking lot like black ribbon. Seniors milled in clusters, gowns peeled to the waist, diplomas flapping like victory flags. Tyron stood by the flagpole, cords slung loose around his neck, talking to a linebacker friend who couldn't stop punching his arm in congratulations. When he spotted his father, conversation evaporated. Tyron closed the distance in a dozen hurried strides, laughter still drying on his face. "Dade, are you okay?" Solomon scanned his son, cataloging pride points the way other men checked tire pressure. "Better question is, are you?" Tyron's jaw flexed. "If they'd touched you, I'd have walked off that stage and given them the moment they wanted," Solomon said, calm as evening rain. "You handled yours like a man, head up, mission first." Tyron's gaze slid toward the gym doors where the 6 seals lingered in casual orbit, chatting about nothing, eyes on everything. "Those guys, who are they?" "Men I bled with," Solomon replied. "Men who understand that loyalty doesn't retire, A breeze rattled the flag above them. Tyron exhaled, as though the whole day were leaving his lungs in one measured breath. That was powerful. It was necessary. Solomon corrected softly. Sometimes silence outranks a sermon. For a moment, neither spoke. The traffic of jubilant families swirled around them, but the space they occupied felt carved out of time. Tyron finally broke the hush with a grin that was all his mother's. So, Conal of the highway, where to now? Solomon's answering smile was small but unstoppable. You're choosing dinner, graduate. Waffle House. Can't outrank tradition, Solomon said, guiding his son toward the charger, still his wife's favorite chariot, still carrying memories in the glove box. Behind them, Creed lifted 2 fingers in quiet salute. Tyron mirrored the gesture without hesitation. In the dying light, the motion looked less like goodbye and more like punctuation, closing a sentence written years ago in Afghan sand, reaffirmed today on glossy gym flooring, and carried forward in the steady footsteps of a father and a son. The parking lot was almost empty now, only the soft clatter of folding chairs and the distant pop of a balloon echoing across the asphalt. Solomon unlocked the charger, still smelling faintly of his late wife's vanilla air freshener, and both men slid inside, doors thumping shut like a brief cease-fire from the day's noise. For a breath they sat in companionable silence, the engine pinging with residual heat. Tyron finally turned, eyes still bright from the stage lights. Why didn't you light them up? You just sat there. Solomon tapped the steering wheel once, gathering words the way a sniper gathers breath. Son, I don't have to stand to know who I am, and I don't need volume to be heard. Power isn't what you do with noise, it's what you refuse to let steal your silence. Tyron stared out the windshield, watching dust spin under a street lamp. They disrespected you. And everyone saw it. Solomon said, voice level, but they also saw 6 men stand without a command. Respect doesn't come from shouting, it comes from who shows up when shouting starts. He reached into his jacket, eased out the worn photograph. His wife cradling infant Tyron, a softer battlefield entirely. I carried this through Kandahar, through losing your mama, through today. It reminds me what's worth protecting, and how. Tyron's shoulders eased as understanding settled. I want to move like that. Like you. You already did. Solomon answered. You walked that stage on your own terms. Didn't let anger hijack your moment. That's how men carry themselves when nobody's watching. The outside, the seals were peeling away in different vehicles. No horn honks, no goodbyes, just nods felt more than seen. Creed paused long enough to raise 2 fingers. Solomon mirrored the gesture, Tyron did too, learning a language without sound. So Solomon asked, twisting the key, the charger rumbling awake, victorious graduate picks the feast. Tyron grinned. Waffle House. Extra hash browns. Tradition never retires. Solomon laughed, easing the car into gear. They rolled out past the darkened gym, tail lights flickering on brick, and for a moment the night swallowed the school and its fragile banners. Yet inside the car, the day's true diploma, quiet strength, earned loyalty, and a father's living example, sat between them, weightless and permanent. Some people shout to be remembered, others simply drive on, their silence already unforgettable.